At Starfall Archive, we don't tell stories the easy way. No recycled voices, no hollow spectacle dressed up as meaning, and no pretending that humanity is something it isn't. Because the truth is, humanity was never the strongest species. It was never the most advanced, never the most unified, never the most prepared. But it was always something else. Something far more dangerous. Something that didn't need perfection to survive, only pressure, only conflict, only the slow, brutal sharpening that comes from turning against itself long enough to become something unrecognizable. Out there, among the stars, civilizations rose cleanly. They advanced through cooperation, through shared knowledge, through carefully guided progress. They built order. Humanity built something else. And when the galaxy finally reached out, when it finally decided to measure Earth against its standards, it didn't realize what it was really testing. Not intelligence, not technology, but endurance. And the difference between a species that had known peace and one that had spent its entire existence learning how to survive without it. My name is, well, that part doesn't matter. What matters is this. The day the galaxy came to judge humanity was the day it made its greatest mistake. They called it the selection. Not a war, not an invasion, not even a first contact. A selection. A process as old as the oldest civilizations still breathing among the stars. When a new species reached a certain threshold, industrial expansion, off-world presence, sustained technological growth, the collective would find them, observe them, measure them, and then decide. Not whether they were intelligent, not whether they were worthy, but whether they were acceptable. Because in a galaxy already filled with hundreds of species, there was no room for uncertainty, no room for chaos, and absolutely no room for something unpredictable. So the rules were simple. If a species met the standards, they were elevated, welcomed into the collective, granted access to shared knowledge, faster than light travel, and the stability of a unified galactic order. If they failed, they were erased. Not out of cruelty, but out of caution. Because history had already proven what happened when a species slipped through that filter. Entire systems burned. Civilizations collapsed. The collective did not make the same mistake twice. And so, when humanity was discovered, the process began. Quietly, carefully. Observations were made. Data was collected. Every war, every invention, every contradiction. A species divided into nations, yet capable of global cooperation. Primitive propulsion systems, yet functional colonies beyond their homeworld. Endless internal conflict, yet relentless forward progress. They were inconsistent, irrational, dangerous in ways the models did not fully understand. And that alone was enough to concern the analysts. But concern wasn't failure. Not yet. The judgment came later. Behind closed systems. Within networks of minds that had spent millennia refining the criteria of survival. Simulations were run. Outcomes calculated. Probabilities mapped across millions of variables. And when the final decision was reached, it wasn't close. Humanity failed. The verdict was unanimous. Too unstable. Too divided. Too violent. A species that had not grown beyond conflict. Could not be trusted with the stars. The order was issued immediately. A subjugation fleet was dispatched. No ambassadors there, no warnings, no attempt at communication. There was nothing to discuss. The outcome, after all, was already decided. By the time humanity would even realize it wasn't alone, the war would already be over. And somewhere, far beyond their reach, thousands of beings gathered to watch it happen. The station did not orbit a living star. That was the first thing visitors noticed. There was no warmth here. No radiant glow spilling across its surface. Only the cold, distant shimmer of a collapsed sun, a dead core suspended in silence, its gravity harnessed and stabilized by engineering that predated most modern civilizations. The station itself had been built around it. Not attached. Not nearby. Around. A hollow ring of impossible scale, layered with habitats, observation decks, and ceremonial chambers, all arranged with precise symmetry around the dark gravitational heart at its center. It was a place reserved for events that required distance. Distance from politics, from territories, from consequences. And tonight, it hosted one of the rarest events in recorded history. A subjugation. The primary chamber spanned kilometers. Not in length alone, but in volume. The ceiling arched so high above that even advanced optical systems struggled to define its boundaries. Light scattered upward and dissolved into a faint atmospheric haze, giving the illusion that the structure simply faded into infinity. But the true marvel of the chamber was not its size. It was the environments. Hundreds of them. Perhaps thousands. Each one contained within a perfect sphere, smooth, luminous, and hovering just above the chamber floor like suspended droplets of reality. Atmospheric bubbles. Each tailored with absolute precision. Pressure, composition, temperature, humidity, radiation levels. Every variable adjusted to sustain the life of the species inside. To an outside observer, they looked identical, glowing spheres arranged in careful clusters. But step through one, and you stepped into an entirely different world. A being composed of dense methane vapor drifted lazily within a pale green sphere, its form shifting like a slow storm contained within glass. Nearby, a cluster of crystalline entities occupied a vacuum-stabilized enclosure, their bodies refracting the chamber's light into fractured spectra that danced across the floor. Further along, a low-gravity bubble housed towering figures whose elongated limbs moved with exaggerated slowness, each step carrying them several meters at a time. And between them all, movement. Delegates. Observers. Representatives of civilizations that span the galaxy, walking, gliding, floating, or pulsing from one environment to another. Crossing the boundaries without resistance. The transition between atmospheres had once been unpleasant. Early iterations of the chamber's design left residual ionotation along the barrier edges. Thin films of charged particles that clung to clothing, skin, or outer membranes. Formal gatherings often ended with attendees appearing as though they had been dragged through chemical storms. But those imperfections had long since been refined away. Now, the boundaries were seamless. Invisible. A being could pass from high-pressure ammonia into breathable oxygen without feeling so much as a shift in temperature. A technological elegance that reflected the collective itself. Controlled. Perfected. Predictable. At the center of the chamber, suspended above a circular platform, a vast projection array displayed the incoming data feed. It had not yet resolved into a full image. Instead, streams of information cascaded across the field, coordinates, velocity vectors, system diagnostics, each fragment arriving in sequence as it traveled through the faster-than-light relay network. The battle had already happened. Years ago. In a small, unremarkable star system located along the outer edge of the galaxy. What the audience would witness tonight was not live. Not exactly. It was a reconstruction delivered in real time. A narrative assembled piece by piece as the universe itself relayed the event across unimaginable distances. There was something almost ceremonial about it. As if reality itself were telling the story. At its own pace. Around the projection platform, the highest-tier observers occupied larger, more refined environments. Bubbles designed not just for survival, but for comfort. Status was reflected in subtle ways. The density of atmospheric stabilization fields, the clarity of environmental boundaries, the proximity to the central display. Power, here, was not announced. It was arranged. And among those privileged positions, one cluster stood slightly apart from the rest. Not because it was larger, but because of who occupied it. Inside, the atmosphere held a carefully balanced oxygen mix, cool and dry, optimized for a species that required both precision and control in their respiration. The seating was minimal. Functional. Arranged in a semicircle facing the projection. Waiting. Because despite the scale of the chamber, despite the countless species gathered within it, there was only one thing that mattered tonight. Not the station. Not the observers. Not even the collective itself. Only the outcome. Only the moment when a species, unknown and unseen by most of those present, would be reduced to history. And the quiet certainty, shared across every bubble in that vast chamber, was that it would not take long. Varex adjusted the seal of his breathing apparatus with practiced precision, the thin metallic clasps locking into place with a soft, deliberate click. The device rested against his chest like an ornament rather than a necessity, its surface polished to a mirror sheen, threaded with faint lines of amber circuitry that pulsed in slow, steady rhythms. To most species, it would have appeared excessive. To his people, it was a statement. Air was not just survival. It was identity. Every mixture calibrated, every intake controlled, every breath intentional. His 4 auditory crests, delicate, fin-like structures rising from the sides of his head, shifted independently as he moved through the chamber. 2 tracked the distant hum of transactional chatter from a neighboring bubble. The others focused forward, isolating a voice he recognized immediately. Fast. Animated. Unmistakably enthusiastic. Varex stepped through the boundary field without hesitation. The transition was flawless. One moment, the neutral atmosphere of the chamber brushed against his skin, dry, thin, artificial. The next, it was replaced by something cooler, denser, balanced with a precision that allowed his muscles to relax in ways he hadn't realized they were resisting. He exhaled and removed the mask. "You're late." The voice came before the figure fully turned. Tall, semi-translucent. Internal structures faintly visible beneath a flexible outer membrane that shifted in tone with subtle biochemical signals. Trell. Even at rest, Trell seemed incapable of stillness. Filament-like neural strands pulsed faintly along his spine, flickering in uneven bursts that betrayed a constant undercurrent of excitement. "This only happens once in several generations," Trell continued, his voice rising in pitch as he gestured broadly toward the chamber beyond their bubble. "Do you understand that? A full subjugation event. Recorded. Broadcast. Observed by half the galaxy. And you arrive after the preliminary announcements." "I arrived on time," Varex replied calmly, taking a seat. "You arrived early. That's because I care. You care about everything. And I'm rarely wrong too." Varex didn't respond to that. Instead, his attention shifted to the others at the table. Kaylee sat to his left, her posture upright, composed, every movement deliberate. Her species was built for strength, broad shoulders, dense musculature, skin marked with faint red striations that pulsed slightly with her circulatory rhythm. 4 eyes, aligned horizontally across her face, moved independently as she monitored both the central display and the conversation simultaneously. Opposite her, Dron remained motionless. Completely motionless. His scaled exterior reflected the ambient light in muted blues, his body folded forward slightly, arms crossed beneath his chin. Only his eyes moved, slow, precise shifts that suggested calculation rather than curiosity. Varex inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. None of them returned the gesture. Not out of disrespect, but because they were already focused on what mattered. The screen. "The final data summary came in just before you arrived," Kaylee said, her voice low, resonant. "Pre-engagement analysis confirms earlier projections." Trell leaned forward immediately. "Tell him." Varex didn't look away from the display. "I can infer." "Say it anyway," Trell insisted. Kaylee's obliged. "The target species, humanity, has been classified as non-compliant. Technologically capable, but structurally unstable. High internal conflict index. Fragmented governance. No unified planetary authority." "One of those," Trell muttered, almost delighted. Kaylee's continued. "They have established off-world colonies within their local system. Primitive propulsion methods. No faster-than-light capability." That made Varex pause. Slightly. "Colonies," he repeated. "Yes. With sublight technology." Kaylee's inclined her head once. "Correct." Dron spoke for the first time. "They are inefficient," he said flatly. His voice carried no emotion. No inflection. Just conclusion. "A species that expands without optimization wastes resources. Wasted resources indicate flawed strategic planning. Flawed planning leads to collapse. Trell nodded eagerly. Exactly. They stretched themselves too thin. Classic early expansion mistake. Verex leaned back slightly, folding his hands. Or, he said quietly, they adapted to limitation. The table fell silent for a fraction of a second. Not disagreement. Consideration. Kaylee's upper right eye shifted toward him. Elaborate. They lacked faster-than-light travel, Verex said. So they compensated. Built within constraints instead of waiting to overcome them. Dron's gaze shifted. A suboptimal approach. A necessary one, Verex replied. Trell waved a semi-transparent limb dismissively. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. The outcome is already decided. That was the truth everyone in the room shared. Not opinion. Not belief. Certainty. Kaylee's gestured toward the display. The collective fleet represents the combined military evolution of hundreds of civilizations, she said. Every known defensive strategy has been encountered. Every variation analyzed. Every resistance neutralized. Dron added, there is no precedent for failure. None, Trell echoed, almost reverently. Verex said nothing. But his auditory crests shifted slightly. Not in disagreement. Not yet. But in awareness. Because certainty, he had learned, was often the first sign that something had been overlooked. Still, he reached for the glass placed before him, a deep cobalt liquid swirling faintly with internal luminescence, and lifted it slowly. Around them, the chamber continued to fill. More observers arriving. More bubbles activating. More species preparing to witness what history had already recorded as inevitable. Extinction. Trell leaned closer, his voice lowering just enough to suggest anticipation rather than excitement. So, he said, how long do you think they last? Verex took a measured sip, set the glass down, and finally allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not long, he said. And for the first time that night. He was wrong. The projection stabilized. What had once been fragmented streams of data resolved into a coherent display. Clean, structured, undeniable. A star system. Unremarkable by every known metric. A single yellow star at its center, surrounded by a scattering of planets, orbital debris, and artificial constructs that glowed faintly against the darkness. This, Trell said, almost ceremonially, is where it ends. No one corrected him. Because nothing about the system suggested otherwise. The fleet appeared moments later. Not as individual vessels. But as a formation. A dense, luminous cluster of markers, each one representing a drone, a weapon, a fragment of a machine intelligence refined over thousands of years. They moved as one. Perfectly synchronized. No wasted motion, there no deviation, there no hesitation. Autonomous, Kaylee said. As expected. Of course, Trell added. Why risk biological command when the outcome is already predetermined? Dron's eyes narrowed slightly. Command introduces inefficiency, he said. Emotion. Delay. Error. Verex watched the formation carefully. Thousands of units. Each one linked to a central adaptive system. Each one capable of independent function, yet bound to a collective intelligence that processed data faster than any organic mind could comprehend. It wasn't just a fleet. It was a conclusion. The algorithm has never failed, Kaylee's continued. Not once since its implementation. Trell leaned back, satisfied. There it is. The phrase gets repeated for a reason, she replied. And it did. Across the chamber, in dozens of languages, through sound, light, chemical exchange, and direct signal transmission. The same idea echoed. Never failed. Never resisted. Never stopped. It wasn't arrogance. It was record. Every prior subjugation had followed the same pattern. Initial contact. Assessment. Deployment. Erasure. Some species lasted longer than others. A few demonstrated resistance worth noting. But none. Not a single one. Had ever reversed the outcome. Verex's gaze shifted briefly to the system's outer edge. Time delay, he asked. Kaylee's responded immediately. Several years. The event has already concluded. What we're seeing is delayed transmission through relay nodes. So even now, Trell said, a faint thrill in his voice, they're already gone. Dron nodded once. Most likely. The projection zoomed, focusing inward. The fourth planet. A rust-colored sphere, thin atmosphere, surface marked by geometric structures clustered beneath transparent domes. Colony, Kaylee's confirmed. Minimal population, Trell added. Insignificant. First target, Dron said. Of course it was. The algorithm always removed external assets first. Isolation. Containment. Then elimination. Efficient. Predictable. Perfect. The fleet shifted formation. Not dramatically. Just enough. A subtle reconfiguration that optimized descent vectors and attack sequencing. Thousands of drones adjusting their trajectories with microscopic precision. Like a single organism flexing before striking. They won't even see it coming, Trell said. Varex didn't respond. His attention had narrowed. Not to the fleet, but to the colony. There was movement. Faint. Almost imperceptible. Signals flickering across the surface. Energy fluctuations. Pre-activity, he murmured. Kaylee's eyes shifted to her data feed. Likely routine operations, she said after a moment. No indication of awareness. Of course not, Trell added. They have no detection range for this level of approach. By the time they register anything, it will already be over, Dron finished. Again. No disagreement. Because again. There was no reason for one. The display updated. Distance closing. Velocity constant. The fleet entered the outer boundary of the system's inner range. Still no response from the surface. No defensive mobilization. No attempt at retreat. Nothing. They're unaware, Trell said, almost with disappointment. Varex's auditory crests tilted slightly. Not fully. Just enough. Because something about that felt wrong. But he said nothing. Because the data supported the conclusion. And in a system built on data, intuition meant very little. The chamber remained calm. Relaxed. Observers shifted positions. Some engaged in side discussions. Others placed preliminary wagers through embedded systems that tracked predictions in real time. There was no tension. No anticipation of struggle. Only the quiet expectation of process. Like watching a known equation resolve. The fleet reached optimal engagement distance. And paused. Not physically. But computationally. A fraction of a second where targeting systems aligned, variables finalized, and execution pathways locked into place. Here it comes, Trell whispered. Varex leaned forward slightly. The entire chamber, across every environment, across every species. Focused. Because this was the moment where possibility ended. And outcome began. And every being present knew exactly what that outcome would be. Humanity would resist. Briefly. Ineffectively. And then. It would disappear. Just like every species before it. Just like the system demanded. Just like the algorithm guaranteed. Because in a galaxy governed by perfected logic, there was no room for error. And certainly no room for something that refused to behave as expected. The first wager appeared before the fleet even began its descent. It materialized along the lower edge of the central projection. Clean, precise, impossible to ignore. 10.4 standard hours, initial resistance window. A soft ripple moved through the chamber. Not surprise. Interest. The markets are opening, Trell said, his voice sharpening with excitement. Finally. Across the vast space, embedded systems activated simultaneously. Interfaces unfolded in mid-air, data streams reorganized. Predictions, probabilities, and asset valuations synchronized across thousands of nodes. The collective did not merely observe events like this. It quantified them, measured them, turned them into something that could be calculated. And wagered. The parameter is resistance duration, Kaylee's noted, her eyes scanning the incoming projections. From initial engagement to total operational collapse. Standard format, Dron added. Of course it was. Everything about the collective was standardized. Even extinction. More wagers began to appear. They didn't come slowly. They cascaded. 6 hours, minor defensive capability expected 3.2 hours, structural collapse of outer colony 1.7 hours, complete planetary neutralization initiated. Each prediction backed by something real. Trade routes. Resource rights. Energy reserves. Entire economic sectors reduced to variables in a calculation that, to most present, felt almost trivial. Trell leaned forward, practically vibrating. Look at that spread. They're being generous. They're being cautious, Kaylee's corrected. Early uncertainty always expands projections. Unnecessary, Dron said. There is no uncertainty. Verex watched the numbers update in silence. Not the values themselves, but the pattern. The range. Even at their most optimistic, the predictions clustered tightly. Hours. Not days. Not even close. A species erased in less time than it took for some civilizations to complete a single rotational cycle of their homeworld. Pathetic, Trell muttered, though there was no real malice in it. Just dismissal. I've seen longer simulation runs. A new entry appeared. Larger than the others. Highlighted. 12 hours. Maximum resistance scenario. That one drew a reaction. A noticeable one. Even Dron shifted slightly. Who would commit to that? Trell asked, almost laughing. Kaylee's checked the source tag. Newly admitted species, she said. Limited exposure to subjugation events. That explains it, Trell replied immediately. Inexperience. Or optimism, Verex said quietly. Trell turned toward him. There's no difference. Another wager followed. Smaller. Sharper. 2 hours. High confidence collapse. Dron inclined his head slightly. Closer. Still excessive, Kaylee said. The outer colony will fall in minutes. The moon shortly after. Earth will not sustain organized resistance beyond the initial atmospheric breach. Trell's neural filaments flickered brighter. So what do you say? Verex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked back to the projection. The fleet had begun its descent vector toward the fourth planet. No deviation. No resistance. No signs of awareness. Everything looked exactly as it should. Which was precisely why his hesitation lingered. Not strong enough to override logic. But present. Persistent. You're overthinking it, Trell said, leaning closer. This isn't theory. This is history repeating itself. He knows that, Kaylee's added. But the scale matters. That was true. Because Verex wasn't just another observer. He wasn't wagering personal resources. Or isolated assets. What he chose to commit. Carried weight. Across systems. Across alliances. Across an entire network of economic structures that extended far beyond this chamber. Dron spoke again. A controlled risk yields optimal return, he said. You possess sufficient authority. You should act. Trell grinned, or at least, approximated the expression. Translation. Stop hesitating and take advantage of free profit. Kaylee's lower right eye shifted toward Verex. The probabilities are clear. They were. Overwhelmingly so. Every model. Every precedent. Every recorded instance of a species at this stage encountering the collective. Ended the same way. Quickly. Decisively. Without exception. Verex exhaled slowly. Around them, the chamber grew more animated. Signals exchanged faster. Wagers locking in. Values rising. Entire regions of space being traded on the assumption of an outcome no one truly questioned. And beneath it all, the quiet, unspoken agreement that this was not risk. This was opportunity. Trell's voice dropped, more focused now. If you don't take the position, he said, someone else will. That was also true. And hesitation, in systems like this, was just another form of loss. Verex's gaze returned to the projection one final time. The fleet. The planet. The silence. Perfect alignment. Perfect expectation. Perfect certainty. He reached forward. And the interface responded instantly. Awaiting input. Awaiting commitment. Awaiting the moment where observation became participation. How long? Trell pressed. Verex's auditory crests stilled. Completely. The hesitation vanished. Not because the doubt was gone, but because the logic was stronger. Because the system had never failed. Because it could not fail. Because nothing like that had ever happened before. He made his selection. And as the wager locked into place, the entire chamber reacted. Because this was no ordinary bet. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The interface accepted the input, processed it, validated the authorization behind it. And then, it expanded. The projection shifted, making space as a new entry forced its way into prominence. Larger than any wager before it. Brighter. Impossible to ignore. 0.9 standard hours. Full system collapse. The chamber stilled. Not gradually. Instantly. Across hundreds of environments, across thousands of species. Movement stopped. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Signals froze mid-transmission. Entire chains of negotiation cut off as attention redirected toward a single point. Verex. Even Trell went silent. For once. Kaylee's eyes locked onto the projection, all four focusing in perfect alignment. Dron did not move at all. But the subtle tightening of his posture was enough. Sub-hour, Trell said finally, his voice quieter than it had been at any point that night. You went below a full cycle. Verex didn't respond. Because now, it was no longer a private decision. The system had already done what it was designed to do. It broadcast. Identification confirmed, a neutral voice echoed through the chamber's translation network. Authorized representative. Tier 7 economic authority. A pause. Just long enough. Just deliberate enough. To let the weight settle. Wager recognized. And then, the scale was revealed. Not in numbers. Not directly. But in implication. Trade corridors spanning multiple star systems. Long-term resource contracts. Energy distribution rights tied to entire sectors. An economic framework. Not wealth. Infrastructure. Verex had not placed a bet. He had leveraged a civilization. The chamber reacted. Not with sound alone. Light flared across multiple bubbles as bioluminescent species pulsed in sharp, staccato bursts. Chemical signals spiked in tightly contained environments, translating into waves of rapid, coded exchange. Digital interfaces flooded with recalculations as the presence of a high-authority wager distorted the probability landscape. Trell let out a slow breath. You didn't just commit, he said. You redefined the table. Kaylee spoke next. You've compressed the range, she observed. Other positions will adjust. They already were. Smaller wagers began collapsing toward Verex's prediction. The spread tightened. Confidence, once distributed, now focused. Because authority, in systems like this, was influence. And influence reshaped expectation. Dron's voice cut through the noise. Your projection is aggressive, he said. Accurate, Verex replied. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Not anymore. Because now, he had committed. There is no scenario, Dron continued, in which a species at this level sustains resistance beyond initial contact. Agreed, Kaylee said. Trell's neural filaments flickered again, brighter, sharper. Then this is it, he said. This is the winning position. Verex finally leaned back. Calm. Controlled. Certain. The doubt that had lingered before was gone. Not erased. Overwritten. By logic. By history. By the simple, undeniable fact that nothing like failure had ever occurred. Not once. The projection pulsed again. The system acknowledging the shift. Recentering the predictive model. recalculating outcomes based on new inputs. And at the center of it all, Varex's wager remained. Unchallenged. Dominant. A declaration not just of belief, but of inevitability. Across the chamber, attention slowly began to return. Conversations resumed. Signals reconnected. But something had changed. The tone. Where before there had been casual certainty, now there was focus. Sharper. More deliberate. Because the scale of the bet had done more than adjust numbers. It had raised the stakes. Made the outcome feel heavier. More significant. More real. Trell leaned closer again, a grin forming across his semi-translucent features. When this resolves, he said, you won't just profit. You'll set a benchmark. No one will ignore a call like that again. Kaylee's nodded once. Assuming the model holds. It will, Trell said immediately. Dron didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because the assumption was shared. The fleet had already begun its final approach. The outer colony. Minutes away from engagement. The system. Locked. The outcome. Certain. Varex reached for his glass again. This time. He drank. Slowly. Deliberately. As if marking the moment. Because from here, there was no turning back. No adjustment. No revision. Only confirmation. Only the unfolding of an event that had already been decided years ago, now arriving piece by piece through the vast network of the collective. And when it finished, when the final data packet resolved and the last resistance marker vanished, this moment, this decision, would be remembered as obvious. Inevitable. Correct. Because in a universe governed by perfected systems, confidence like this was not arrogance. It was understanding. And understanding had never been wrong. Not once. Not ever. And certainly not tonight. Initial engagement confirmed. The announcer's voice returned, measured, composed, exactly as it had been before. As if nothing in the chamber had shifted. As if the weight of the wagers, the attention, the expectation, did not exist. The fleet has entered low orbital approach over the fourth planet. Target, primary human colony. The projection zoomed. The rust-colored surface expanded across the display, details sharpening as resolution increased. Domes. Clusters of them. Geometric, translucent structures anchored against the planet's barren terrain, faintly illuminated from within. Thin lines stretched between them. Transit paths, energy conduits, fragile connections linking one pocket of life to another in an otherwise hostile environment. Population estimate. Trell asked. Minimal, Kaylee's replied. Several thousand at most. Then this will be quick, he said. No one argued. Because nothing on the screen suggested otherwise. The fleet adjusted formation. Not dramatically. Just enough. Vectors tightening. Targeting systems aligning. A perfect descent. Thousands of drones moving as one, slipping through the upper atmosphere without resistance, without interference, without even a hint that their presence had been detected. They still don't see it, Trell said. Varex didn't answer. His focus had narrowed again. Not on the fleet. But on the surface. There. Again. That movement. Energy fluctuations. Stronger now. Not random. Patterned. Kaylee's, he said quietly. I see it. Her eyes flickered rapidly, processing incoming data. Surface activity increasing, she confirmed. Power redistribution across colony grid. Too late, Trell said dismissively. Even if they detected something, they don't have the capacity to respond at this stage. Dron's voice followed. Reaction time insufficient. That was the logic. Clear. Simple. Correct. The fleet descended further. Altitude dropping. Distance collapsing. Seconds. Now. The projection sharpened again. The drones were visible individually now. Small. Precise. Each one a weapon. Each one part of a system that had never needed to adapt mid-engagement. Because it had never needed to. They're in range, Trell said. And then. The surface of the planet ignited. Not gradually. Not chaotically. Precisely. A line of light erupted across the upper edge of the colony's approach vector. Then another. And another. Until the darkness above the domes was carved apart by a sequence of controlled detonations that expanded outward in perfect synchronization. Nuclear. The system identified it instantly. Multiple warheads. Timed. Layered. Positioned exactly along the fleet's descent path. For a fraction of a second. The projection flickered. Not from damage. From recalculation. Shockwaves expanded through the upper atmosphere, colliding, overlapping, forming a dense field of radiation and force that tore into the leading edge of the drone formation. Markers vanished. Not many. But enough. 213 units lost. The number appeared in stark clarity. And for the first time that night, the chamber reacted. Not with excitement. Not with anticipation. But with something quieter. Something sharper. Surprise. Trell blinked. That's. He didn't finish the sentence. Because he didn't have a word for it. Kaylee's voice came next, slower than before. They had nuclear weapons deployed in advance. Dron's eyes narrowed. Prepositioned, he said. Along optimal interception vectors. Verex leaned forward slightly. They were waiting. Silence. A brief one. But real. Trell recovered first. It doesn't matter, he said quickly. 200 drones is negligible. The fleet adjusts. It always adjusts. He was right. The projection confirmed it. The formation shifted. Clean. Efficient. The damaged edge compensated instantly, rebalancing distribution, rerouting command pathways, tightening cohesion. The descent continued. Uninterrupted. The colony below. Burned. The domes cracked under the follow-up assault, structures collapsed inward as the drones reached ground level. Surface installations disintegrated under sustained fire. Within minutes. It was over. The projection dimmed slightly, marking the end of the first engagement. Outer colony neutralized, the announcer stated. His voice was steady. Almost. But not entirely. The difference was subtle. So subtle that most in the chamber might not have noticed it. But Verex did. Because he was listening for it now. For deviation. For inconsistency. For anything that didn't align with the expectation that had defined every moment up until now. Trell exhaled, tension releasing from his posture. See, he said. Exactly as predicted. Kaylee's nodded slowly. Yes. Dron remained still. But his gaze had not returned to its earlier calm. Verex leaned back again, reaching for his glass. This time, he didn't drink. Because the number still lingered on the edge of the display. 213 units lost. Insignificant. Statistically irrelevant. Operationally meaningless. And yet, it shouldn't have happened. Not like that. Not prepared. Not waiting. Not precise. The fleet was already moving again. Leaving the ruined surface behind. Reforming. Reorienting. Setting course for the next target. The moon. And as the projection shifted to follow, the chamber did something it hadn't done before. It grew quieter. Not silent. Not yet. But the ease was gone. The casual certainty. Replaced by something else. Something that hadn't been part of the system before. A question. Small. Unformed. But present. And once a system built on certainty begins to question itself, even slightly, it is no longer perfect. It is no longer predictable. And it is no longer safe. The fleet has entered lunar engagement range. The announcer's voice carried again across the chamber, steadier now, but only on the surface. Beneath it, something had changed. Not fear. Not yet. But effort. A deliberate attempt to maintain control. The projection shifted. The fourth planet fell away behind them, its surface still glowing faintly where the colony had been erased. In its place, the moon. Grey. Scarred. And alive. Clusters of light stretched across its surface, embedded within craters and along vast plains of regolith. Thin lines connected them, transport systems, power conduits, networks that spoke of planning, of permanence. They built extensively, Kayleigh observed. Overextended, Trell corrected quickly. That many installations only increases their vulnerability. Dron said nothing, but his eyes remained fixed on the screen. The fleet did not hesitate. It never did. Formation tightened. Vectors aligned. Descent began. This time, there was no delay. The surface responded immediately. The first detonations came fast. Nuclear signatures bloomed across the approach vector, brighter and denser than before. Not a single defensive line, but layers. Overlapping. Redundant. Engineered to intercept not just one trajectory, but multiple. They adjusted, Varek said quietly. They repeated, Trell replied. There's a difference. But even as he spoke, the projection updated. Losses. Higher than before. Still acceptable. Still within operational tolerance. But rising. The fleet pushed through. Radiation cleared. Atmospheric absence removed one variable, simplifying calculations. And then, the second layer appeared. Movement. From the surface. Fast. Numerous. Uncoordinated. At first glance. New contacts, Kayleigh said. Her eyes flickered rapidly. Small-scale units. Autonomous. Drones, Dron concluded. Primitive, Trell added immediately. They're deploying countermeasures. Predictable. But the projection didn't behave the way it should have. Because the human drones didn't engage like standard defensive systems. They didn't form lines. They didn't hold positions. They moved. Erratically. Swarming outward in chaotic patterns that defied clean targeting solutions. They're not optimizing, Trell said, confusion creeping into his voice. They are, Varek replied. Just not the way we do. The first collisions occurred seconds later. Human drones intercepting the descending fleet. Not individually. In clusters. Groups sacrificing themselves to disrupt trajectory paths, forcing civilian drones to adjust mid-descent, breaking the clean geometry of their formation. The projection flickered. Not from damage, but from overload. Targeting systems recalculating faster than they were designed to. They're introducing noise, Kayleigh said. Deliberately. Dron leaned forward slightly. The algorithm prioritizes efficiency, he said. This reduces efficiency. Temporarily, Trell snapped. It will compensate. But even as he said it, the compensation wasn't clean. Not immediate. The civilian drones destroyed the incoming swarm units with ease. Individually, they were superior. Faster. Stronger. More precise. But there were more of the human drones than expected. Far more. And they didn't behave like assets that needed to survive. They behaved like tools designed to be spent. That's, Trell hesitated. That's inefficient. That's effective, Varek corrected. The projection zoomed further. Closer to the surface. And that's when the third layer revealed itself. Launch signatures. From the largest lunar installations. Heavy. Crude. But powerful. Ships. They're deploying manned platforms, Kayleigh said. Why? Trell demanded. Why risk biological units when they have drones? Because drones aren't enough, Varek said. The ships rose from the surface in staggered waves. Bulky. Angular. Clearly not designed with the same refinement as collective engineering. But they carried weapons. And those weapons fired. Beams of concentrated energy lanced upward, striking civilian drones mid-flight. Not perfectly accurate. Not perfectly efficient. But strong enough. Alongside them. Projectiles. Solid. Accelerated to extreme velocities. Impacting with enough force to shatter drone structures outright. Projectile weapons. Trell said, disbelief breaking through. They're using mass drivers. Rail-based systems, Kayleigh confirmed. Primitive. Effective. The word hung there. Uncomfortable. Undeniable. The battle space changed. What had been a clean descent became chaos. Drone formations fractured. Engagement patterns overlapped. Human swarm units disrupted targeting priority while ships and surface defenses layered sustained pressure into the confusion. They're coordinating, Kaylee said. Across multiple systems. Dron's voice followed. Adaptive. Time passed. Not minutes. Not moments. But enough. Enough for the chamber to feel it. The shift. What had been expected to end quickly was continuing. The fleet was still advancing. Still winning. But not cleanly. Not easily. Losses climbed. Slow at first. Then faster. Hundreds. Then more. The projection struggled to maintain clarity as the density of engagements increased. Explosions overlapped. Signals interfered. Data streams lagged by fractions. Small delays. But in a system built on precision, those delays mattered. The announcer spoke again. Carefully. What we are observing is an expected deviation, he said. The target species has concentrated its defensive capabilities within this region. A logical, though ultimately insufficient, strategy. Trell nodded quickly. Exactly. They're delaying the inevitable. But his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Because the delay was longer than expected. Longer than modeled. Longer than comfortable. Varex didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because his attention had shifted entirely now. From prediction to observation. From certainty to analysis. Because for the first time since the event began, the outcome no longer felt immediate. And that, more than the losses, more than the resistance, more than the unexpected tactics, was the real problem. The fleet was still winning, but it was no longer inevitable. And once inevitability breaks, even slightly, everything built on top of it begins to fall. Time lost its clarity. Not completely, but enough. The clean progression of events, the precise sequencing that had defined every prior subjugation, began to blur at the edges. What should have been a linear collapse became a struggle. The fleet maintains operational superiority, the announcer stated. But now, he said it more often, as if repetition could reinforce reality. On the projection, the battle above the moon had transformed into something unstructured. Unstable. Unfamiliar. Civilian drones still dominated in direct engagements. Every one-on-one interaction ended the same way. Human units destroyed, formations broken, resistance reduced. But there were no more one-on-one engagements. Only layers. Human drones continued to swarm, not in waves, but in constant motion, intersecting paths, overlapping vectors, sacrificing themselves in patterns that forced the fleet to constantly adjust. Each adjustment cost time. Each recalculation introduced delay. And those delays began to stack. They're not trying to win this engagement, Varex said quietly. No one responded immediately. Because they were all beginning to see it. They're shaping it. Kaylee's eyes moved rapidly, tracking multiple data streams at once. They're controlling the tempo, she said. That's not possible, Trell replied. But it sounded weaker now. Less certain. Dron leaned forward further than before, his stillness finally broken. The algorithm prioritizes optimal outcomes, he said slowly. But optimal outcomes assume predictable variables. Varex finished the thought. They're removing predictability. The projection stuttered. Just for a moment. A fractional delay in the relay. But it was enough to draw attention. Signal congestion, Kaylee said. Data throughput increasing beyond expected parameters. Because the battle had grown too dense. Too chaotic. Too complex. The system was still processing. But no longer effortlessly. Below, on the lunar surface. The human installations were still active. Damaged. Burning. But not destroyed. More launch signatures appeared. More ships. More drones. More resistance. They shouldn't have this capacity, Trell said. They shouldn't still be functioning. But they were. And worse. They were improving. Patterns began to emerge. Not in the chaos. But through it. Human units adjusting their movement based on fleet behavior. Adapting in real time. Not individually. Collectively. They're learning, Kaylee said. Dron's voice dropped. Too quickly. The fleet responded. Of course it did. It always did. New targeting priorities. Adjusted engagement protocols. Revised formation structures. For a brief moment. Order returned. Clean lines re-established. Engagement efficiency increased. Loss rates stabilized. Trell exhaled sharply. There. You see. Correction. But the moment didn't last. Because the humans adapted again. Faster this time. Exploiting the adjustment. Shifting their swarm patterns to counter the new targeting logic. Reintroducing inefficiency. Reintroducing delay. The system corrected. They countered. Again. And again. And again. The projection became a loop of escalating adaptation. Not chaos. Evolution. Accelerated. Compressed. Weaponized. This, Trell's voice faltered. This isn't standard resistance. No, Verex said. It isn't. Hours passed. Real time within the chamber. Not the battle. The battle had already ended. But the delay. The relay. Stretched the experience into something immediate. Something unfolding. Something no longer predictable. The wagers remained visible. Still active. Still unresolved. Verex's position. Still dominant. Still unchallenged. But now. It felt different. Not like certainty. Like exposure. Because the timeline was slipping. The fleet was still advancing. Still pushing toward victory. But not within the expected parameters. Not within the window he had defined. Kaylee spoke again. The outer lunar defenses are degrading, she said. But slower than projected. How much slower? Trell asked. She hesitated. Not long. But enough. Significantly. Dron's eyes remained fixed on the projection. The system is no longer operating at peak efficiency, he said. That was new. That had never been said before. Not in any recorded subjugation. Not once. The announcer spoke again, his voice tighter now. The situation remains under control. The fleet continues to reduce resistance. The outcome is unchanged. But no one reacted to that. Not the way they had earlier. Because now, they were watching. Not listening. Because what they were seeing did not match what they were being told. And then, it happened. Not an explosion. Not yet. A shift. Subtle. But absolute. The space between the moon and the planet below changed. Not visually. Not immediately. But in the data. Energy readings spiked. Not from the moon. From Earth. Deep within its atmosphere. A single point. Then. Another. Then. A pattern. Verex's auditory crests snapped forward. Kaylee's. I see it. Her voice was sharper now. Focused. Alert. That's not surface defense, she said. Then what is it? Trell demanded. No one answered. Because the system was still processing. Still analyzing. Still trying to classify something. That didn't fit. The projection flickered again. Stronger this time. The relay compensating for a surge of incoming data. And for the first time since the event began, the chamber fell completely silent. Not anticipation. Not excitement. Something else. Recognition. Because whatever was happening was not part of the model. And when something exists outside the model, it is not just unexpected. It is dangerous. The energy spike intensified. The point between Earth and its moon brightened. Not like a weapon charging. Like something tearing through the limits of what the system understood. Verex stood. He didn't realize he had moved until he was already upright. Eyes locked on the projection. breath steady, but shallow. Because deep down, past logic, past history, past everything he had trusted up until this moment, something else had taken hold. Not doubt. Not yet. Something sharper. Something colder. A realization forming faster than he could fully process it. If the fleet was struggling against what humanity had already shown, then whatever was coming next was not escalation. It was something else entirely. And when it arrived, it would not adjust the outcome. It would redefine it. The light didn't flash. It didn't erupt. It didn't behave like anything the system had been trained to recognize. It appeared. Instantly. A sphere of pure white existence forming between the moon and the planet below, so bright, so absolute, that for a fraction of a second the projection failed to render it correctly. The display collapsed into a blank field. White. Featureless. Total. Then. It expanded. Not like an explosion. Not like fire. Like a boundary. A perfectly smooth front of annihilation pushing outward in all directions, swallowing space itself as it grew. The system tried to compensate. Tried to interpret. Tried to label. And failed. Every sensor reading spiked beyond expected thresholds. Radiation. Energy density. Gravitational distortion. All of it exceeding parameters that had been considered theoretical at best. The projection flickered violently. Then stabilized. Just long enough to show the truth. The fleet was gone. Not damaged. Not scattered. Gone. The dense cluster of blue markers that had filled the space above the moon. Reduced to almost nothing. A handful of signals blinking weakly at the outer edge of the blast radius. Everything else. Erased. For 3 full seconds. No one in the chamber moved. No one spoke. No one even processed what they were seeing. Because there was no framework for it. No precedent. No recorded instance of a subjugation fleet. Failing. Let alone. Ceasing to exist. The announcer stumbled backward. Not dramatically. Not even visibly to most. But enough. Enough for those watching closely. To see it. His internal systems flickered, light pulsing erratically through his semi-transparent form. He looked down at his data feed. Then back at the projection. Then down again. As if repeating the motion might change what he was reading. It didn't. The collective scientific network, he began. Stopped. Started again. Has reached a preliminary classification. His voice had lost everything. No performance. No control. Only function. What we have just observed is consistent with a high-yield matter-antimatter detonation. The words didn't land immediately. They couldn't. Because the scale didn't fit. Source? Kaylee's asked. Sharp. Focused. Demanding clarity. The announcer swallowed. A visible contraction along his throat. Planetary origin, he said. Silence. Absolute. From Earth. Trell's body went still. Completely still. His neural filaments, once constantly active, dimmed to near darkness. That's not possible, he said. But it wasn't a statement. It was a reflex. Dron didn't speak. For the first time. He had nothing. Verex stood motionless. Eyes locked on the projection. On the empty space where the fleet had been. Because this was not deviation. This was not resistance. This was not even war. This was annihilation. And it had not come from the moon. Not from the defensive front. But from the planet itself. From a species that, by every model, should not have been capable of it. You said. Verex's voice cut through the silence. Not loud. But sharp enough to carry. You said their primary military assets were concentrated on the moon. The announcer looked at him. And for the first time, there was something in his expression. Not authority. Not confidence. Something closer to uncertainty. I reported the data available at the time, he said. Verex took a step forward. You told this entire chamber that their strongest defenses were off-world. Another step. That their planet was vulnerable. The announcer didn't respond. Because there was nothing to say. The projection updated again. Slowly. As if even the relay system struggled to keep up. 98% fleet loss confirmed. The number appeared. Clear. Final. Irreversible. Trell made a sound. Not a word. Not even a coherent expression. Just a break. Kaylee's 4 eyes stared at the display, unfocused now, tracking nothing. Dron lowered his head slightly. Not in defeat. In recalculation. Verex stopped moving. Because there was nowhere left to go. No action left to take. Only the reality. Settling in. The system had not failed. The fleet had. The algorithm had not broken. Reality had. And somewhere. On a planet that had been marked for erasure. A species that had never reached the stars. Had just destroyed the most advanced military force the galaxy had ever assembled. Not over days. Not over weeks. But in a single. Impossible. Moment. The projection dimmed slightly as the blast radius expanded beyond the primary field of view. What remained of the fleet? What little had survived? Drifted in disarray. Disconnected. Uncoordinated. Alive. But no longer a force. No longer a system. Just fragments. And from the surface of Earth. New signals began to rise. Multiple. Rapid. Uncontrolled. Verex didn't look at them. He didn't need to. Because the outcome, the real outcome, had already been decided. Not by the collective. Not by the system. But by something none of them had accounted for. Something none of them had understood. And now, it was awake. No one spoke. Not at first. The chamber, once alive with motion, with signals, with the layered noise of countless species observing what they believed would be a predictable end, had fallen into something else entirely. Stillness. Not the calm of certainty. Not the quiet of anticipation. But the kind of silence that follows when a system realizes it no longer understands itself. The projection continued. Because it had to. The relay did not pause for comprehension. It did not wait for interpretation. It delivered. Cold. Uninterrupted. Indifferent. Fragments of the fleet, what remained, drifted in high orbit above the moon. Disorganized. Disconnected. The elegant formation that had once defined them reduced to scattered signals, each one operating independently, stripped of the unified intelligence that had made them unstoppable. They're attempting regroup protocols, Kaylee said. Her voice was steady, but distant, like she was reporting from somewhere far removed from her own body. Dron's eyes followed the data. They were never designed for this, he said quietly. For what? Trell asked. But he already knew. Dron answered anyway. Survival after failure. The words settled heavily, because they implied something deeper than the loss itself. They implied that the system, the perfect, refined, infallible system, had never considered the possibility of losing. Not truly. The projection shifted again. From orbit. To Earth. Blue. Green. Alive. Untouched. The contrast was unsettling. After everything they had just witnessed. After the scale of destruction, the magnitude of the weapon that had erased the fleet. The planet itself remained intact. Stable. Silent. As if nothing had happened. That's impossible, Trell whispered. Energy dispersion alone should have. It was controlled, Verex said. His voice was quiet. But clear. Every word deliberate. Directed. Kaylee's turned her attention fully to him now. All available data supports that, she said. The blast radius expanded outward, not inward. Minimal planetary impact. They contained it, Dron added. Or shaped it, Verex corrected. Silence again. Because both possibilities were worse than the alternative. The projection updated. New signatures. From Earth. Rising rapidly through the atmosphere. Missiles. Primitive by collective standards. Chemical propulsion. Basic guidance systems. Crude. But numerous. Very numerous. They're targeting the remaining units, Kaylee said. There was no need to ask why. No need to question intent. The last fragments of the fleet were not retreating. They were attempting to recover, to stabilize, to survive. And humanity was not giving them that chance. The missiles reached orbit. Impact followed. One by one, the remaining signals vanished. Small bursts of light against the vast darkness of space, each one marking the end of something that, until tonight, had never been defeated. The projection dimmed, then steadied. No more movement. No more signals. No more fleet. Only debris, floating silently above a world that had just proven itself capable of something the galaxy had never seen. The announcer stood alone. Still. His internal systems had stabilized. But whatever presence he had carried before was gone, replaced by something simpler, more honest. This event, he began, stopped, recalibrated. This event is concluded. No flourish. No summary. No attempt to restore narrative control. Because there was no narrative left to control. The chamber did not react. No applause. No signals. No movement. Only the slow, almost mechanical process of beings, standing, one by one, leaving, crossing the boundaries of their atmospheric enclosures and stepping back into the neutral environment of the station. No conversation. No analysis. Not yet. Because analysis required understanding. And understanding was no longer available. Varex remained where he was. For a moment longer. His breathing apparatus rested untouched beside him. The glass in his hand. Still full. He hadn't realized he had stopped drinking. Trell sat motionless. His neural filaments dim. Inactive. Kaylee's 4 eyes were unfocused, each one fixed on a different point that no longer existed. Dron had not moved at all. But something about his stillness had changed. Before, it had been certainty. Now, it was reconstruction. Varex finally reached for his mask. Lifted it. Secured it back into place with steady hands. The familiar pressure returned. Measured. Controlled. Predictable. He stood. The weight of the room pressed in around him, not physically, but conceptually. Everything he had known. Everything he had trusted. Every system. Every assumption. All of it. Had just been challenged. No. Not challenged. Broken. He stepped toward the boundary of the bubble. Paused. Just briefly. And looked back at the projection one last time. At the empty space above the moon. At the silent planet below. And for the first time, he didn't see a target. He saw a variable. An unknown. A question the galaxy had never needed to ask before. Until now. He stepped through the boundary. The atmosphere shifted around him. Neutral. Featureless. Cold. And joined the others moving toward the exits. Slow. Silent. Uncertain. Behind him. The projection continued its final updates. Debris mapping. Residual energy readings. Fragments of data that would be studied, analyzed, dissected for decades to come. Because that was how the collective responded to anomalies. It learned. It adapted. It corrected. But this was not a simple anomaly. This was something else. Something deeper. Because somewhere, far beyond this station, on a world that had just survived its own extinction, a species had been given something it had never had before. Proof. Proof that it was not alone. Proof that something out there had tried to destroy it. And most importantly, proof that it could fight back. It would take time. Years. Decades. For the collective to respond. To rebuild. To send another fleet. Stronger. Smarter. Prepared. But time. Worked both ways. Because humanity now had the wreckage. The technology. The evidence. And the question. What was out there? And how dangerous was it? Varex reached the docking corridor. Paused only once more. His auditory crests lowered. Flat against his head. Not in submission. In thought. Because for the first time since this began, he wasn't thinking about the outcome, or the system, or the failure. He was thinking about what came next. About a species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself, now turning its attention outward, refining, adapting, evolving, with purpose, with direction, with something to aim at. The galaxy had reached out and struck first. It had expected silence, submission, extinction. Instead, it had done something far worse. It had introduced itself. And in doing so, it had awakened something. Something that did not forget. Something that did not forgive. Something that had never needed a reason to fight before, but now had one. Varex stepped forward. Into the corridor. Into the unknown future waiting beyond it. And somewhere, across the vast distance of space, humanity was looking up at the stars for the first time, and wondering who had tried to kill them, and how soon they could return the favor.